Okay, hello. Just a quick little video about seam allowances and scant seam allowances. So I recommended at the start that we use a scant seam allowance. Let me just go through what the difference between those is. So to test your seam allowance, what you'll need to do is just get a strip of fabric and sew a seam. I've sewn these on the wrong side so that you can get a bit of contrast. This one here, if you line up the 1/4 of an inch to the edge, is a 1/4 of an inch, okay? And this one, which probably doesn't look any different until you measure it, is if I line up the edge, just the other side of the 1/4 of an inch, so it's just slightly less. Let me go in for you. Just slightly less than a 1/4 of an inch. Now that means that when I have pressed my fabric and folded it out, the amount of fabric, so when that's pressed, you'll lose a little bit to the fold, but it means that the amount of fabric that's lost by sewing these two together should be 1/2 an inch exactly. So a 1/4 of an inch from there and a 1/4 of an inch from there, which means if I was matching that up with one piece that had no seam in it, it should fit exactly. When you sew an exact 1/4 of an inch, when you open it out and press it, you're going to lose a little bit, and I know it seems so picky, to that little fold there, and it's just going to make this piece ever so slightly shorter, which shouldn't matter if you're just doing 2 pieces, but when you start getting a few adding up, it means that it will get shorter and shorter and shorter than it should be if comparing it to something else that has less seams. So that's why a scant 1/4 of an inch is quite important, because it means that it will be finished the correct size to match another thing. If you were just sewing all squares the same size, as long as you kept consistent, that would be all that matters. But because in this Suncatcher Stars quilt, we are matching up one part with 2 seam allowances in it to something with either 1 seam allowance or no seam allowance, so the centre part, we want to try and keep the pieces with more seams as accurate as possible. So that's why using a scant 1/4 of an inch is just the most accurate way to piece your fabrics and to get the best result. And the best way to do it is to just get a piece of fabric, make sure it's got the line edge, just like you would if you were sewing. So sew a 1/4 of an inch for you and measure it. And measure that it comes up. Which one was my scant one? This one. If I hold it up against here, you can see there that it's slightly less than a 1/4 of an inch, just slightly less, and that's all you need to do. Test it out. You might need to try a few things with your machine. If you've got a needle that can move left and right, you might need to take it in a few points. If not, you might have to look at where you guide your fabric through and adjust that so that your guide is more accurate for the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I hope that helps. If you do have any questions though, please let me know.